On Wednesday, MPs in the House of Commons voted to prescribe Direct Action Group Palestine Action as a terrorist organisation. But by Thursday morning, a new group was making quite a splash online. That video of a lorry being vandalised was accompanied by this post on social media. Breaking. Newly launched Direct Action Group Yvette Cooper targets Time Logistics, who transport weaponry for Israel's biggest weapons firm. If you want to ban Palestine action, you'll have to prescribe Yvette Cooper too. Something I never thought I would ever say. We are all Yvette Cooper. Now, the other Yvette Cooper, the slightly less cool one, the Home Secretary, was overwhelmingly supported by MPs in her quest to ban Palestine action. After the debate on prescription, 385 MPs voted to label Direct Action protesters terrorists, with just 26 voting against our rights for political free expression. Now, the Home Secretary had bungled Palestine action... Sorry, I'll start that again. Now, the Home Secretary had bundled Palestine action with two neo-Nazi white supremacist groups on the prescription order. Those groups, unlike Palestine action, have threatened violence to people. That made it harder for MPs to vote against the order, but still, the vast majority of our lawmakers didn't even raise an objection to the Home Secretary's plans. A handful, however, stood up for my right and your right to continue to say we support a group that damages the properties of arms firms profiting from genocide.
Why has he linked these three organisations together? He clearly has made a judgment on each of the three organisations independently of each other. And I think it would be fair, and I'm sure many outside would think it would be fair, if we were taking individual votes on the three. Because many of us are very concerned about the issue facing Palestine action, and that is the issue that we wish to address in the debate here today.
Is he aware that several UN special rapporteurs, including those protecting human rights, say that they have contacted the UK government to say that acts of protest that damage property but are not intended to kill or injure people should not be treated as terrorism?
This heavy-handed approach threatens basic freedoms and sets a dangerous precedent for all political dissent in the UK.
When the suffragettes carried out a campaign of window smashing, poster paint defacement, cutting telegraph and railway lines, targeted bombing and arson, specifically avoiding harming people.
I oppose the blood-soaked hands of this government trying to silence us. So I say this loudly and proudly on Wednesday, the 2nd of July, 2025. We are all Palestine.
Order!
No, we're not.
After that debate, Zara Sultana also made an important point of order about a fellow MP who spoke in favour of prescription. That was John Pearce. No, not the guy who voiced Robot Wars. He's the Member of Parliament for High Peak.
Point of order, Zara Sultana.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. During the previous debate on the prescription of Palestine action, the member for High Peak, who I have notified, spoke without declaring that he is chair of Labour Friends of Israel and has accepted hospitality and overseas trips funded by pro-Israel lobby organisations. The House was discussing a non-violent direct action group that directly challenges the Israeli state, which is on trial for genocide against the Palestinian people. Can you advise me, Madam Deputy Speaker, on what mechanisms are available so the British public are truly aware of what interests are being represented on this floor?
I thank the Honourable Lady for her point of order and indeed for having given advance notice of it. The procedure for raising a complaint of this sort is by writing to the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards, and it is not a matter for the Chair.
I mean, she raises very important points, right? There are lots of people in our parliament who have loads of connections to the Israel lobby, who are members of either the Conservative or members of Labour Friends of Israel. Lots of people have received donations from people who lobby for Israel, who are Zionist lobbyists, essentially. And so the people need to understand when prescription orders like this go through, they need to understand where those loyalties lie. They need to understand who's being under the influence of who. Because again, when you have things like lists of people, members' interests, for example, a lot of people in our media, a lot of people in our political class treat those lists of members' interests as well. As long as I sign off on it, I can put all of this information up here, and that means that it's above board. But the only reason it's above board is so that people can make informed decisions over who they elect, who they support, and whether or not that they can trust their parliamentarians, right? And this is stuff that's out in the open, so it's very right for Zara Sultana to highlight it. Otherwise, what's the point of having the list of members' interests in the first place? Now, some support for Palestine action has also emerged from the House of Lords, where the proscription order was being debated this evening. Peter Hain, now Lord Hain, a former Labour minister under Tony Blair, said this. In 1969-70, I was proud to lead a militant campaign of direct action to disrupt all white racist South African rugby and cricket tours, and we successfully succeeded in getting them stopped for 2 decades. No doubt I would have been stigmatised as a terrorist today rather than vilified as I was then. This government is treating Palestine action as equivalent to the Islamic State or Al-Qaeda, which is intellectually bankrupt, politically unprincipled, and morally wrong. Frankly, I am deeply ashamed. Update. The Lords have just minutes ago passed the proscription order, meaning Palestine Action may be prescribed as a terrorist group in the early hours of Saturday morning. But the Direct Action Organisation has secured a hearing tomorrow morning for interim relief. If granted, the Home Secretary's prescription will be paused while Palestine Action seeks a judicial review, which could overturn it. Mike, those were some particularly strong contributions in the chamber by a lot of the representatives who were supportive of Palestine Action. Where do you think things go from here?
It's really difficult to say. I really hope this is overturned just because I think it's such a massive overstep and such an overreach. And it sets a really worrying precedent. I mean, I saw the Novara statement the other day and totally agreed with every single word of it. You know, I think what Palestine Action are doing is property damage. Of course, there are laws that kind of criminalize that. But to say it steps over the line and is an act of terror is deeply worrying and deeply problematic and sets a worrying precedent, I think, for broader kind of acts of political dissent. And I think Britain is a country in many ways built on acts of political dissent. You know, people so proudly talk about suffragettes and all they achieved. They, you know, committed loads of acts of property damage that would now, in some ways, maybe seen prescribed as a terrorist group, which would be absurd, by the way. So I think we need to really be careful here. And people might think, oh, you know what, it's Palestine Action, so it doesn't really affect me too much. But no, it could be a group and a cause that you deeply care about. And I think a lot of this is about how the British state is choosing to respond to any dissent in the name of kind of free Palestine or more broadly. I think this is about delegitimizing the movement. So if you prescribe a group as a terrorist group, it isn't just Palestine Action that label sticks on, by the way. That label sticks on maybe anyone who's flying a Palestine flag, who's wearing a Palestine pin, who's got a watermelon on their Twitter name, or whoever it might be. It's about delegitimizing the movement more broadly because the British state is committed to providing cover for Israel. So I think a lot of this is about the kind of broader British state reaction and response and continuing kind of apathy towards the plight of Palestinians. And that for me is worrying. What I would say is, and I was really encouraged by the kind of rebrand to Yvette Cooper because I think it does show that people are still willing to resist. And people are still willing to resist with satire, be bold, be courageous. And I do think we have to kind of commend that because I think in the face of such adversity and such pressure, there's this kind of satirical response to this, and I think it also highlights the absurdity of prescribing them as a terrorist group. So I've been kind of really worried about this and been really kind of bothered about this for the last couple of days because it just feels like such an overreach and such an overstep. And yet, you know, in a couple of days' time, if I was to say, you know, some of the words I'm saying now in terms of speaking for Palestine Action, that could become a real problem. So it's really worrying where we are at the moment and the kind of real pushback we're seeing against any dissenting action in favour of the Palestinian people in Britain. You know, it starts here and who knows where it could end. So I would love to say something optimistic, Helen, about where I think this could end, about how this could be overturned. But at the moment, I just feel so despondent with the kind of current state of British politics, with the current state of affairs when it comes to the British state's position on Israel. And I was hoping there'll be some shift on this time. Look, I wasn't expecting anything massive. We kind of know what he campaigned on and how he spoke about kind of Palestinian lives prior to being elected. But I'd expect some kind of tonal shift. I'd expect some shift. And what we're seeing actually is a continuation of the rhetoric, you know, and a continuation of some of the things we saw under the Conservative Party. And in many ways, this overstep here in prescribing Palestine Action as a terrorist group suggests that the Labour Party actually are willing to go quite far on this and willing to kind of frame an entire movement as kind of this kind of terrorist movement that should be feared. And that's a real problem.
Yeah, the links with the previous Tory government are really well founded in terms of their ideological commitment to smearing the pro-Palestinian movement in this country. I remember Swilla Braverman talking about the marches for a ceasefire as being quote unquote hate marches, right? All of these different conflations of criticisms of Israeli policy or Zionism or the ideologies behind it with the things like anti-Semitism, for example, those claims of yesteryear just kind of crept up again and again in public discourse. And that gets represented again when people within our politics will always use the most kind of visceral language or indeed the most draconian policy to target the pro-Palestinian movement whilst being super lenient, super lenient and indeed forgiving rhetorically for the pro-Zionist movement, even though it is, of course, the Zionist movement itself that is why we're in this mess in the first place, because that's why there was a problem with the occupation in Palestine. So it's very frustrating to hear this double standard continue to crop up in terms of when you look at both sides of this discussion.